Okay, welcome everyone to the Third Thursdays with Tom and Tim. I'm Tim Nutt.
And I'm Tom Dillard.
There's only 13 people.
The purpose of our show is to have an opportunity to talk about Arkansas topics, whether it's history or politics or culture or art, as we're talking about tonight. I'd like to remind the viewers that you can ask questions on the chat feature or by sending us an email at our Third Thursday email address.
And we do have the chat feature on here, so if you're interested in sending us a question or responding to something, please feel free to use that chat feature. It may be different on some of y'all's if you're using an iPad or something like that, but feel free to use that. So this is not on the script, but Tuesday was the anniversary of Arkansas statehood.
That's true.
June 15th.
June 15th, 1836 was Arkansas Statehood Day, and I can't right offhand tell you how many years that's been.
Is it 185?
I'm not sure.
18. Neither of us are good at math. That's why we went into the humanities. So, but tonight we're going to be talking about art, and the reason we chose art tonight is because recently I bought a new painting, and I always like to look for Arkansas artists, and so I was at an estate sale here in Little Rock, and I came across a painting by David Bing, B-I-N-G, and I had never heard of David Bing.
I didn't know his work either, but I believe you have an image of it.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen, and so y'all can see it.
It's a really nice work.
Yeah, it's called Watermelon Clown. So if you can, you'll see that the abstract figure is holding a watermelon. We can't see it because our taskbar is blocking it out. But it's interesting. And someone told me that he was a window dresser in the department stores here in Little Rock.
When is that date from? Do you know?
That is from 1959.
Arkansas has produced a lot of artists over a long period of time. And of course, that reminds me of how ludicrous it is to think that we can talk about Arkansas art meaningfully in an hour's time. It's ridiculous. But what we can do, though, is share some of our enthusiasm for art and for Arkansas artists and their work.
Yeah, and I think both of us have been collecting Arkansas art for a long time. And you actually got me interested in Arkansas art when I first started working for you a little over 30 years ago.
I have been interested in Arkansas art for a long time, and I've known a number of Arkansas artists, and I've put together a small collection. I don't have a large collection. I don't have a Carol Clore, for example, or any of the big named artists, but I have artists which bring joy to me, and I would like to talk about some of my favorite artists at this point.
First, before we move forward to the artists, we probably should, well, let's mention these two books that just came out by the U of A Press.
Arkansas Made, this new edition of Arkansas Made is a remarkable, phenomenal record of the creative impulse of Arkansans, going all the way back to the very beginning of the state. And even there very likely be some paintings in there, maybe from the French period when we weren't even a state. But anyhow, this is a remarkable book, a remarkable 2-volume set. The first edition came out many, many years ago, probably 20 years ago. The U of A Press did an excellent job with it. But this 2-volume set is a whole different order. It's, well, for one thing, they're gigantic. They
They're probably what, 700 pages a piece, something like that?
Probably on really fine paper. It's excellent printing, excellent photographic reproduction. I'm keen on these two books. University of Arkansas Press.
And they're not, they're pretty affordable too. I think they're only like $40 for each volume.
I think so, which means some good person or organization or agency must have helped fund these things in order to keep the prices affordable.
And the first volume deals with furniture and crafts like that. And then the second volume deals with art and photography.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to be writing a column on these two books. They're really quite an addition to the published literature on our state.
And interestingly, this is not, we discovered recently that this is not the only work on Arkansas artists, because I showed you that book earlier that I found at an estate sale as well about Hot Springs artists.
Oh yeah, of course there's been things published on artists from around the state. I don't mean to imply that this is the only thing that's been published at all, but it's a remarkable set.
And it's certainly probably it's the most comprehensive work that we have on Arkansas art.
Oh yeah, they even have some prehistoric items in the book. It's you just have to see it in order to appreciate it.
So let's talk about some of your artists that you have in your collection, some of your favorites. And the first one is
Rosemary Fisher. She was a well-known ceramics teacher over at the Arkansas Arts Center. There's a couple of her work, pieces of her work in my own personal collection. I never knew her really. She died quite a few years ago. She was the wife of editorial cartoonist George Fisher in the Arkansas Gazette. She was on the faculty there at the Arkansas Arts Center for a long time, and she had many students who really were her acolytes. I've also recently, well, not recently, but I have another piece by Celia Story. Celia she works under Mud Pies is the name, I think, of her ceramics business, but she's just a wonderful person, a journalist at the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, and she's really quite a fine potter, in my opinion. She does really remarkable stuff. I don't know if they can see this or not, but a lot of her work has a whimsical aspect to it. This work here has a really interesting handle on it. For example, there are lots of good potters in Arkansas. I urge people to get to know them and to buy their work. It really is quite an opportunity.
Celia is a great person, and I think her pottery matches her personality.
It does. It's a little bit off center, to be frank.
Well, I like your description of whimsical more than off center, but Celia would probably agree with your off center comment, though, actually. So, but I like to take credit that I was one of the people who got Celia interested in pottery, because I took a pottery class at the Arts Center, and I kept telling her how much I enjoyed it. And finally, she took a class, and this is the result. I am not as good a potter as Celia Story.
No, she became really quite amazing quickly.
Yeah,
and I think she teaches.
She does, and I appreciate you agreeing so quickly that I was not as good of a potter as Celia Story. Now you also have, of course, Lewis Friend is a artist that pretty well known in Arkansas, and he painted a few of the post office murals. around the state.
Right. Lewis and Elsie Friend, they're associated with up at Eureka Springs, but they live the last few years of their life here in Little Rock, and they were a remarkable couple, both artists, both interesting, both fun, both very, very productive. Here is a Cubist nude by Lewis Friend from my collection. I like this piece a lot, and Friend worked over such a long period of time. He started painting back in I think in the 20s, and then Elsie started work early. They were both trained artists.
Mm-hmm.
They both knew what they were doing. Elsie's jewelry was a huge hit. She was a really fine jewelry maker.
And what they call that? What did she call it?
Was it Elsie Craft?
Ceramics.
Ceramics.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you remember when we were at the Butler Center and we went to the Friend warehouse, the storage warehouse downtown?
Right. When the Friends moved to Little Rock to live in retirement at Parkway Village, they rented an old building in downtown Little Rock to store their work. Much of his work was really quite large.
Mm-hmm.
He did some really huge pieces, and also some large triptych-like pieces.
Well, there's that great series of the history of man that UCA has. It takes it through the different stages of there's like the creation and the industrialization and things like that, which is a really nice series. But I remember walking into that warehouse and just paintings everywhere and looking up, and there was this huge painting of the Last Supper, and then you had Jesus in the center of the table looking down at you as you walked into the room. So that kind of stuck with me when we went into that.
Well, I wish we had time to talk about them more because
Yeah.
they were delightful people.
Yeah.
And they really made a major contribution to the arts in Arkansas. They had an art school up at Eureka Springs for a long time.
Yeah, we could do a whole show on the Friends. But here's one that you would like to have in your collection, right?
Yeah. The Friends were extremely well known in Arkansas and outside of Arkansas, actually. But there was a doctor named Howard Stern at Pine Bluff who was a really quite extraordinary artist. He was a Renaissance man. He was a medical doctor of high repute. He was a painter. He was a gunsmith. He did all kinds of things. Photographer of note, and he, along with George West, did this book not long before he died, A Lifetime Looking, and it really is remarkable. Let's take a look at some of his works, which I copied out of this book. I don't have any of his works in my own collection. Here's his book plate from, I believe, 1941. A linoleum print that he did. It is so reminiscent of Rockwell Kent, the great Scandinavian artist.
And that's so simple in the lines, but it's a really
Powerful composition.
It is, yeah.
On the left there is one of Howard Stern's guns that he made. He only made 3 pistols actually, but he did a number of rifles and muskets and all kinds of things. He was such a remarkable guy. He joined the Little Rock Photography Club back in the 1920s. And really got quite adept at photography. On your screen is a picture of his wife, a remarkable person, Jane Stern, This is when they were young in the 1920s, I believe it was. And the photography club had a meeting or a contest, and this is one of the things that he did for the photography club. Jane, by the way, was a remarkable conservation leader in Arkansas. Here's one of his paintings. I really like his work. It's really interesting. He gave a number of his works to various and sundry places. The Butler Center for Arkansas Studies at the Little Rock Public Library has one of his paintings of a beach scene that is just spectacular.
I think they have the, well, and UCA has, doesn't UCA have some of their work?
I don't know. I don't know how productive Dr. Stern really was. I know from this book that his works are found in various collections around the country, but I do not see him his work being offered very often.
I like the industrial look of this painting.
It's a really nice and interesting piece. And he did others that were in the same vein, but others that were quite different. What's next?
Well, I think now we're moving to mine.
Yes,
from my
these
collection.
are some items from Tim's collection.
This is a Dixie Durham. She was from Wilson, near Wilson, over in Mississippi County. And I really like this one with the chickens in the barn. And do you know what you know who her father was?
Yes, her father was. Help me out, Tim.
Hampson.
Yeah, the Hampson Museum. He founded Hampson Museum. And you were going to ask, I'm going to ask you, what was Dixie's middle name?
I don't know.
Dimple.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Dixie Dimple Durham.
I found this painting on eBay, right when I first started collecting art, and I was really happy to find it. It's really nice. I like it. And of course, here's one of my friends. This is a mural study, or a study for a mural that was. I don't think the mural was ever executed. It's for the college in Lakeland, Florida, Stetson College.
He worked at Stetson,
yeah,
for a while.
But I really like this, and it looks great above the mantle with all the nyloke underneath it. I think they really complement each other. But
Tim has a very nice collection of nyloke pottery. Another example of historic Arkansas art.
So I like that one. And then here's my Elsie friend that I have, and I really love the movement in this one. I love the colors in this one.
You know, the question eventually becomes, who do you like the best, Elsie or Lewis? And I'm afraid I come down on the side of Elsie. Her work is just so wonderful, and you know, she worked in so many different media. She worked in fabrics. UCA has a really fine example of one of her mobiles that she made. I think Elsie's work is really wonderful. And I don't have a whole lot of her stuff.
Elsie's work, I think, is a lot more airy and a lot of movement.
Well,
but I will say that Lewis's square dance, that had a lot of movement in it.
Yeah, that's true. Square Dance was a great painting.
Yeah, but a lot of his, I think, are heavy.
They are. And Lewis went through so many phases. You know, he went through one phase later in life where he did all of these Aztec Indian themed paintings, some of which were quite large.
And then here's another one of my favorite ones. It's not, unfortunately, I couldn't get a very good shot of it, but this is a watercolor by Adrian Brewer of the Mayo Clinic up in Minnesota. this is, I'd love to have some more, another Adrian Brewer, but this is the one that I have for the time being. And I like it. Actually, I love the colors, and I especially love the sky in this painting.
His family was associated with Minnesota.
Yeah, yeah. And then, of course, his son, Edwin, was a painter. And then Edwin's daughter,
Audrey. The Brewers are really important in the history of art in Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
As I think it was John Gould Fletcher said, they kept the light burning even during the depths of the Depression.
Mm-hmm.
They were still turning out really good work, and they were also teaching other artists too.
I think, didn't Adrian do the illustrations in the centennial edition of the Gazette? Those the illustration, like the history of Arkansas. I think he did that. Those really nice black and white illustrations.
They look like woodblock prints.
Yeah. And then, of course, I have to Perry County. I always like to do collect work for Perry County, and I bought this one in 2018. Dennis McCann, who's a former firefighter and lives in Maumelle. And I really like this work just because of it. One, because of its association with Perry County, but also just the composition of it as well. I have another one of Dennis's, a landscape that I really like.
I think Dennis and his son, who is also a painter,
Jason
McCann, I think they're both really fine artists.
Mm-hmm.
And are they both firefighters, or were they both?
I think Jason was a firefighter. He's a teacher now, I believe, at Central.
Anyhow, the McCanns are really wonderful artists, and I'm saving up money to get one of those.
Well, I think tonight we've come to the time where we're going to bring our guest on. And our guest is Russ Aikman, who's a native of Arkansas, but he lives in Dallas-Fort Worth area now. And he's a collector of art. He's been collecting art for quite a while now.
I've known Russ for a good long while now. I've known his parents much longer. Russ's mother is a retired teacher from Whitehall, and she really was an inspiration to me and to other people working in the field of Arkansas history, to see what she could do to instill an appreciation for state and local history in Arkansas among young children. She did a remarkable job. And she produced a son here, Russ Aikman, who has an interest in art.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I think Russ should be, there you are, Russ. Let me take the spotlight off of us. So, can you hear us, Russ?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can. Glad to have you here tonight.
Glad to be here. Howdy from Dallas.
Let's talk about art.
Okay. Well, I've enjoyed seeing pieces from your collection. You guys both of you have a good eye.
Well, I would like to think so. It's I would like to think that my appreciation for Arkansas art is based on some sort of criteria other than they're just being from Arkansas.
Well, tell us, Russ, to begin, how did you get started collecting Arkansas art?
Sure, Tim. So before I got interested in art, I started collecting antiques, and that was back in 1996. So hard to believe it's been a quarter of a century of collecting. Initially, I was kind of dabbling as a collector, and then over time, I got more serious about it. But I got very interested in the mission style antiques and the whole arts and crafts movement, which was popular, from about 1900 to the late teens. So I started just collecting furniture and accessories. So I like you, Tim, I have a collection of Nile oak, love love Nile Oak pottery. On my wish list would be to get a piece of Ouachita pottery, which is quite rare.
Right. I think that's on everyone's wish list.
It absolutely is if you're interested in Arkansas pottery. But at some point, maybe around 1999 or so, I realized, what I had hanging on the wall behind my Mission Antiques really didn't go with it so much. So I thought, hey, I need to start getting something that looks appropriate for the period. And I began to cast about. And, I think if you're new to collecting, the most important lesson is learn as much as you can about whatever it is you're going to be collecting, whether it's pottery or furniture or art. And so I started learning little by little. And at that time, around the turn of the century, there wasn't much information available on Arkansas art. But anyway, I found out, I heard the names through an advertisement in the back of a magazine. Somebody was looking for Nile Oak pottery. And they also mentioned Adrian Brewer and Louis Friend. And I'd never heard of these guys. And so I said, well, what do they have to do with Arkansas? That kind of got me started there. And the other thing that happened about the same time was I met a group of collectors here in the Dallas area that collect Texas art. And of course, some Arkansas artists worked in Texas and vice versa. Some, quote, Texas artists worked in Arkansas. So I became active in that group, and people would open up their homes, show off their collections, a great way to learn about art and a fun way to meet fellow art lovers.
So where did you, when you learned about Louis Friend and Adrian Brewer, and so you did your research, and then do you remember what your first, one of your first paintings is that you bought, and where you bought it, or how'd you find that?
Tim, I couldn't afford paintings. I started with works on paper with prints, which is a great way to start because a number of Arkansas artists like Louis Friend did works on paper. Howard Simon did works on paper. Carol Clore did works on paper. And any number of other artists. J. Carl Hancock worked on paper. And so I started there. And let's see, an early favorite would be, one of the artists I'm going to show some pieces in my collection is Olin Travis. Mm-hmm. And I got a print by him that was an Arkansas scene. And that was fairly early on in my collecting time. And so I enjoyed, and I still have that print.
Why don't you share with us some of your favorite works that you've collected, or just interesting pieces that you want to share?
Okay, I'm gonna, if I can share my screen here. All right, are you seeing that?
We're seeing Zoom.
Yeah. give me a sec to close out a few things here.
And I'm glad to see that you had us on your calendar tonight.
Yes, of course. And let me do this. How about that?
That's great.
Okay, so this first work is a lithograph by an artist named Georgia Schreiber called From Arkansas. And this was, I think, Tim, you mentioned you had bought the Dixie Durham piece on eBay. This is an eBay find for me. I probably had it at least 15 years. And so my understanding that Schreiber did pieces for every state in the Union in the lower 48. I don't know if this is one he did specifically to represent Arkansas, or the title would imply that this person that he's portraying was someone who might have been from Arkansas but living elsewhere. Mm-hmm. But I just, it's interesting. I've had a number of people come to my house, and a lot of the people who visit, they're drawn to this work. They they just see this woman and there's something compelling and really interesting about her. And my mom could corroborate this, but she looks just very loosely like my great grandmother, who I have very, very vague memories of, because she passed when I was quite young. But you look at the muscles in this lady's arm. She's led a pretty hard life, and yet there's something that she seems to have a positive note about her. She's a survivor. She perseveres.
Mhm. I like the look of that. It reminds me of the Dorothea Lange photographs.
Absolutely, and would have been done about the same time, maybe a little bit later.
Mhm.
I think Lange was working in the 30s. Well, she continued to work going forward in time. But and the other interesting thing about this image is I'm pretty sure I've seen another print by Schreiber with this same woman in it. I don't remember that print. I'd have to dig through some notes, but he found her interesting enough that he decided to include her in more than one image that he did. So that's the first piece. This is the second piece, Howard Simon's block print, Rhythms of Men in the Wilderness, which he did in 1948. And I just love the energy of this piece, the sense of movement. I love the composition, where he has the one guy working in the foreground, wielding an axe, and then in the background you've got some guys with a crosscut saw. They're working through. Of course, the timber industry has been a big part of the economy in Arkansas for many, many years. I guess maybe almost since going back to the 19th century. So I believe that he had already moved out of Arkansas. He homesteaded, I believe. Tim, you would know this. Was it in Perry County where he homesteaded?
It was in Hollis, where Hollis is now sort of in the eastern part of, or the western part of the county.
Part of the national forest, more or less.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Well, that's actually not too far from where my dad grew up, which was in Yell County. And so anyway, I love this piece. I love what he was able to do and creating this. This was also an eBay purchase. And this was I believe it was like a print of the month, sort of a offering from that was offered. He worked some out of New York City, some out of the Memphis area, and but just a really interesting image. I've had some serious art collectors comment on this piece that it jumped out at them.
Mm-hmm.
For those who don't know, Howard Simon was married to Charlie Mae Simon, the writer and children's author, and they lived for a time on a homestead in Perry County, part of that larger back to the land movement of the Depression era. And it didn't take with either one of them, and their marriage dissolved eventually. But he did do a lot of work while he was here, or at least some work.
And Tom, didn't he illustrate Charlie Mae Simon's father's, one of his books? Was it Way Back Yonder?
Back Yonder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Back Yonder.
Wayman Hogue.
Okay.
Wayman Hogue was his father-in-law, Charlie Mae's father, and he wrote an autobiography which is well worth reading, called Back Yonder, and his son-in-law illustrated it.
Mm-hmm.
It's you can still pick up first editions of that if you look around.
Okay. The next print I'd like to share, another work on paper and another block print, is by the artist John Howard. This is I'm pretty sure done in the early 40s. After he moved to Arkansas to take a job at what is now the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. He studied under an artist named Hale Woodruff in Atlanta. And John Howard is the only artist of color I have in my collection. But I love the feel of this. I love what he did with the sky. And one of the things he was able to do was to take a fairly humble dwelling, what was basically a shack, and make it really interesting and find a way to show that maybe some strength in that piece. You can see another building in the background, a small, basically again, a shack. I don't know where this was meant to portray, but he also did some beautiful paintings with similar subject matter with really vibrant colors, just beautiful pieces. And then later, I think he started to move towards abstraction and cubist type work. So really interesting artist. I think also, guys, you don't see many of his pieces. I've seen other artists, whenever you become a teacher or an administrator like he was at a university, he was so busy, I'm sure, teaching and working there, he probably didn't have much time to make art.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to have a piece of John Howard's work. He worked in a number of different media, and he did some interesting stuff. He did a death mask of Scipio A. Jones, the great black attorney. There have been some things published on John Howard. UAPB, or its predecessor institution, Arkansas A&M, has contributed substantially to Arkansas art. Also on my want list is a Henry Linton. Henry might be retired now, I don't know, but his work is really nice. And then back earlier, he's no longer associated with UAPB. And I'm not going to be able, I'm sorry I brought him up. I can't recall his name right now, but a really spectacular painter of abstracts. So UAPB has really had an impact on Arkansas art.
Mhm.
Okay, so the next piece is an etching by the artist Jackson Lee Nesbitt. And this piece, I just love the feel of the piece, even though this is a black and white, obviously black and white print. I think it's one of the most colorful black and white images I've ever seen. And this was a piece that Nesbitt was, I believe, grew up in Missouri, and he was studying at the Kansas City Art Institute under Thomas Hart Benton, who's one of the most well-known regionalist artists, of course, in the US. And Benton would take his students down into the Ozarks in the summer on sketching trips and to learn about art. And on one of those sketching trips, Benton and Nesbitt were working side by side. And this guy comes along on a horse with his dog, and he looks at them and he thinks that they are surveying the area there to put in a new road. And he kind of makes some comment to them to the effect, well, it's about time they put in a new road here. And then he rides away. Well, Nesbitt sketched that image really quickly and then later created this print from that. I love the split rail fence on the left. You can see the reflection in the right in the ditch there, somewhat of a reflection of the leaves that are growing along the edge of that ditch. So now I love to the right, you see the plowed field, and then the clouds have a real Benton-esque feel to them. If you look at a Thomas Hart Benton print from about the same time, his clouds look very, very similar to this piece.
I really like this piece. I like the lines of the split rail fence, and I like you. I really like the clouds, the depiction of the clouds.
So the other thing I'll mention about this piece which I've had for, I don't know, 14 years, something like that, maybe longer. Unbeknownst to me, Nesbitt did a painting of this exact same scene, and it came up for auction this past year. I had no idea that it was even out there. And it's basically an exact depiction of this scene. And the auction estimate going in was $6,000 to $8,000, which is, of course, that's a lot of money for a work of art. But it sold for over $50,000. So two people want something really bad to bid it up that high. But I'm happy with my print. It's a beautiful print. And he did do, I'll mention Tom, he did do some other prints of Arkansas subject matter.
I'm not familiar with him.
No.
Had you been familiar with him?
I am familiar with Olin Travis.
Yeah.
Right. So the next piece is another work on paper. It's by the Dallas-born artist Olin Travis, and this was a woodblock print he did of a school that was in St. Paul, Arkansas, which is up in the Ozarks. Travis would go to the Ozarks. He studied, let me step back for a sec. He studied at the Art Institute, the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. And he was later found out about, the Ozarks. He would go on sketching trips starting in the teens. And over time, he would return there. Often every summer he would come. And at some point, he actually opened a summer school there, and he would have students from Arkansas and from other states. He would bring students with him from Texas. But I love this scene. Again, the clouds have a wonderful feel to them. I love the kids are playing. Looks like a school teacher in the foreground is walking away. Maybe it's the end of the school day. And then for kind of some fun notes, he's got a pig just kind of wandering through the scene there in the foreground as well. So a really kind of a fun image. And this was you asked earlier, Tim, what was an early purchase that I really enjoyed? This is the piece that I'm referring to.
It's a nice piece too.
I'll mention just the fact that Travis liked this subject so much that he also did a watercolor of this scene. That watercolor is in the Dallas Museum of Art. And he did a large oil painting. I would say it's maybe 38 by 40 inch oil painting. And the oil painting was exhibited back around 1940 or so. And so it's in a private collection here in Dallas. Same basic scene, same composition, slightly different in terms of some of the details, but otherwise very, very similar sort of scene and subject matter. And speaking of Travis, this is my first painting I wanted to share. This is a portrait that he did, and he has the name of the individual, Simon Staton, that he painted. I just love the feel of this piece. It's very, if you look back behind him, the wall, he's sitting on his front porch. He's got this old hat on. He's kind of gaunt looking. Looks like he's had kind of a difficult life. And maybe in some ways, the best thing about this painting is in the background, you see some light flickering through the window. So the Travis was a very gifted impressionist painter. This has a bit of an impressionist feel to it. So I just love that aspect of it as well. And the story on this individual, Staton, was he was had worked in the steel mills up in Illinois, and he was a World War I veteran, and he'd retired, come back to the Ozarks. And the other kind of funny story about this was Travis asked the guy to pose for him, and he just sat on the front porch of his cabin there, and Travis is painting this individual. And some of his neighbors walked up, saw what was happening. Well, they started making fun of the fact, they said to Travis, "You're painting the man, he's the ugliest man in the county. Why are you painting this guy?" And I think Travis, though, he saw people perhaps that looked a little unusual to you or me. that was someone that was more interesting to him to try to capture. And I think he did a great job in this particular piece.
Mm-hmm.
So the next piece is a woman artist, Catherine Hill Travis, and she was actually Olin Travis's first wife. She grew up in the Ozarks, and she specialized in watercolor paintings, and I should say in still life paintings. And so this is a piece called Wildflowers that she did. It's not dated, but my best estimate, and I've seen dozens of her pieces over the years, my best estimate is this would be late 20s, early 1930s. And so large works like this are fairly rare by her. I got this out of a auction in North Carolina, actually just this past fall. Felt very, very fortunate to be able to get this piece. And so one thing that's interesting, the frame, on the back of the frame, there's some handwriting, and it mentions the title of a painting, but what it references is a painting by Olin Travis. So apparently he had done a painting, and then they swapped out his painting and put this frame on her painting.
Their styles are very different. I mean, with the still life, and then, you know, of course, then all the movement in Olin Travis's work.
Absolutely. Now, she did also do some landscape pieces, subject matter in the Ozarks, and she's done some genre pieces. One of the things she was known for is her knowledge of plants, and especially flowers, and the symbolism associated with plants and flowers. I was reading something that her granddaughter wrote about her in some files that I have, and according to her granddaughter, she had a notebook with notes on over 500 plants and flowers, and what does a hyacinth represent, or what does a rose represent, what does a poppy represent, and so forth. And so when she did a painting like this, in her mind, it represented much more than just a still life painting. Next is another Arkansas native, Everett Spruce. And this is a piece that he did in the late 1930s, of course. And Spruce was one of those individuals who actually came to Texas after being, quote, discovered by Olin Travis in the 1920s, when Travis was going there on some of his annual summer artist camps that he was doing. There was a retrospective on Spruce that was held at the Amon Carter Museum of Art just this past year. Now, having followed artists from Arkansas and art by Arkansas artists over 20 years now, I would consider Spruce to be one of the two most important artists who were born in the state in the first half of the 20th century. The other artists that I think we would call them one of the most important would be Carol Clore. And you might say, well, how can you say that Spruce was important? And the answer is his work was collected at one point by over 30 museums around the country, not just here in Texas. He moved to Texas after starting in Arkansas, worked at the Dallas Museum of Art, eventually became a professor at the University of Texas. So, but he loved nature. He loved old trees. He had lots of images of trees in his works. And this is just I felt very, very fortunate to be able to add this piece to my collection.
That's really nice. I like that. I like this work.
It's okay if you like that genre.
And this is the last piece I wanted to share. So Tim, you showed a Adrian Brewer piece. This is an Adrian Brewer piece that I was able to acquire that he did in New Mexico. And of course, he worked in Arkansas. The piece you shared was a Minnesota piece. And he also worked, I believe, in Arizona and California. You know, the wonderful thing about this piece was he featured the sky. He made a very low horizon here. And one of the things that jumped out at me when I first saw this painting was how he made the color blue in the sky. He went from a very light blue, low near the horizon, to much deeper blue near the top of the piece. And you have this just beautiful sky, basically a skyscape, if you will, that he was able to capture. Got some Native Americans in the foreground, and it's got kind of a what they call, artists call, a wet on wet approach. So kind of tough to see in this image, but rather than doing the oil where he would do, say, some colors, let those dry, then put other colors on top of it, the first color, he may put a second color while the first one was still wet. So you have some blending in the foreground that you can see in this particular piece. But it's just a gorgeous piece. I love looking at it every day when I'm heading through my house. And it's what's really interesting also, I've visited his grandson, one of his grandsons who lives in Little Rock. And I walked into his house, and he has a piece that's almost exactly the same subject matter as this one. It's got the two Native Americans, they're on horseback. It's got the low horizon, the big sky. And so I was blown away to see that Brewer had painted basically a copy of one painting after he did one. And why would he do that? I have no idea. But anyway, sure. I was happy to have it.
I'm sure you've seen the catalog that was put together years ago when UALR did a retrospective on Brewer. And it became, if you look through that carefully, you'll see that he did a lot of work in the Southwest. Of course, we know about his bluebonnet work in Texas, but he did a large number of scenes treating the Southwest and with Native Americans included. Several of those were given to the Butler Center when Tim and I were employed there.
Tom, I remember the one you had in your office quite vividly. It was a wonderful hill country scene here in Texas.
It was spectacular and large, very large.
Absolutely.
I like the vibrant colors in this one. How big is this painting, Russ?
Tim, I think it's maybe 28 by 30, something like that. It's fairly large.
Mm-hmm. It's nice. It's very nice.
It was exhibited when a previous owner had it. It was exhibited at the Tyler Museum of Art in a group of pieces of artists working in New Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Well, you certainly have a really nice collection there.
Who are some of the other artists, just quickly, who are some of the artists, other Arkansas artists included in your collection?
Well, I mentioned J. Carl Hancock. I think it's an etching of Little Rock scene that's got the Capitol building in the background, which is quite nice.
Hancock?
Yeah, Carl Hancock.
Yeah, he did a lot of that.
He did. I've got some Lewis Friend pieces. I've got an Elsie Friend piece. Those are works on paper. Let's see, who else do I have? You know, to be honest, I've also branched out into collecting, if you'll forgive me, some Texas art. And so I've got a mix of Arkansas and Texas art together in terms of the pieces that I have here. Those are the ones I can remember off the top of my head. Oh, I have an interesting piece by a Texas artist, but it's an Arkansas scene named Edna Ganzer, Ganser. And it's from 1936. And it's a hillside scene up in the Ozarks. And it's just south of Fayetteville. And I'm suddenly drawing a blank on the the small community where it was at, but I think it was a small artist colony at one point back in the 1930s. So she had gone there to paint, and I have one antiques dealer. He knows if he ever finds anything from Arkansas, he's calling me because he knows I'm too apt to give him some business there. But so I've got, as I said, perhaps a handful of other artists that worked in Arkansas over the years.
There are a number of people who collect art, Arkansas-oriented art. I believe we have in our audience tonight Tom Teeter, who is a longtime collector and whose collection I hope that I can see soon. Another collector of art here is Rhett Tucker. He has a large collection, and I understand he has floors and all kinds of interesting works. Who else? Bobby Roberts, former director of the public library in Little Rock, has a number of pieces that he's acquired recently of Black artists. And I think he recently acquired a Clore also. So there are people out there who do try to seek out Arkansas artists, not simply because they're from Arkansas, but because we've had some interesting work created in this state. Tim?
Thank you for being here, Russ. I wanted to mention another artist that I was not familiar with until earlier this week when Imogene Reagan from Clarksville. I saw some pieces of her work, and she did a lot of really nice landscapes.
Russ, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And I look forward to catching up with you sometime when you're up this way visiting with your folks.
I would love to do that.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks, Russ. Well, we did a poll of other Arkansas artists, and we asked people who their favorite Arkansas artists were.
No, it's not a poll of artists. It's a poll of people who...
We asked who some of the favorite artists were.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for correcting me on camera.
My pleasure.
And we got some good response. All of them are good responses, but someone mentioned John Bell Jr. from Fort Smith is one of their favorite artists. And then someone mentioned Catherine Strauss from here in Little Rock, and I was not familiar with Catherine Strauss's work in Little Rock here, but I took a look at her website, and it's really quite good, quite interesting. I really like it. She's the head of the art department at Henderson, and all of her artwork focuses on women and their friendships and the struggles that they go through in their lives. So it was really nice to learn about her work. V.L. Cox, two people mentioned her as being their favorite artist. And she got her degree from Henderson as well, and she lives in Little Rock now. She works in mixed media. She had a really successful exhibit on the about ending hate in the U.S. And then, of course, Carol Clore. Someone mentioned Carol Clore as being one of their favorite artists. He was from Earl over in eastern Arkansas. Dorothy M. Hauser from Morrilton was listed as an artist. I wasn't familiar with her.
I don't know
as well. And then Josephine Graham. Someone mentioned Josephine Graham.
Of course, Josephine Graham was an institution here in Little Rock for a long time, and was quite an accomplished portraitist. Mm-hmm. But of course, she also painted a lot of other things too.
I'd like to have a Josephine Graham. I don't have one.
You have a small one.
I do have a small one. It's of a street scene in New Orleans. Yeah, really nice. And then someone mentioned Ken and Donna Stout, both artists, a married couple up in Fayetteville.
Yes, associated with, he was associated with the art department at the university. A really nice couple.
And we didn't mention George Dombeck. I'd love to have a George Dombeck at some point.
George Dombeck, a Washington County painter near Fayetteville, really does interesting work. And yeah, I'd love to have a Dombeck too.
Mm-hmm. There's so many artists out there that you still that I would love to have in my my collection, but unfortunately my pocketbook, my wallet does not support my desire for artwork, I guess.
Well, but you have a wonderful collection, Tim.
I do, and I've been very fortunate to get the pieces that I have.
You have a Henry Sugamoto, for example.
I do have a Henry Sugamoto.
Henry Sugamoto was a Japanese internee here, and Tim was able to acquire one of his works. I'm jealous. I'm envious. I don't have any Sugamotos. And
then Tyrone Lewis from down in Mina, I have a couple of his.
Yes,
that I really like.
The late Tyrone Lewis worked in was a painter. Worked mostly in oils, I think.
Mm-hmm. So, well, we both have really nice art collections, I think. Mine's a little bit better than yours, but
well, that's because I gave you a lot of mine.
You have one of mine on loan.
Have you any questions or anything that have been posed during the program?
We had a couple of comments about someone mentioned that Russ visited, this is Cindy commenting that Russ visited her in New York City, and all they did that for a week was seek out Arkansas art that he had located ahead of time. So
that's great.
I think that's a great friend when you go to New York and able to go around with you and look for Arkansas art.
Tim, I think we're out of time.
Are we out of time? We are out of time. Let me put on the screen our email. And if you have any questions, please email us. And our next show is going to be July 17th. And we hope that you all will join us. And thank you for joining us tonight.
Good night.
Night.